So you asked me to tell you the story about the time I went to Russia with the governor on an ag conference. So I was with the governor and with a bunch of ranchers from the northwestern states, Idaho, Montana, Colorado, we had a few, Wyoming, big ranchers. And we're going over to Russia to try to help them. Putin, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, he wanted to reestablish his herds of cattle when we were over there. So that was the reason why we were there. We'd finished our business in Moscow, and we were on the train for St. Petersburg. And we're all sitting around telling jokes and talking about cattle and what have you. And I asked the question to this rancher. I said, Phil, do you have as good a yield with your livestock and everything the same as what your grandfather had when he homesteaded this ground? He thought for a minute and he said, no. He told me grass was much better and they got better production, they got better, the cows settled easier, we had less prolapsing, we had less retained placentas than we have now. And I said, well, why do you suppose that is? He said, I don't know. And I said, do you put anything back in your ground? He said, well, for the most part, no. We've got all the cows, they urinate in the fields and they defecate in the fields, and we run a harrow out there and irrigate, and everything seems to be doing just fine. And I said, do you replace any of your mineral or any calcium in that soil? And he said, no, it's all going back in from the manure. And I said, do you think those cattle take anything out of the soil? And I guess he never really thought about it. All of a sudden, these other guys are getting into the conversation. And they go, why are you bringing that up? What are you thinking? I said, well, let's just think about this for a minute. So when you're grazing this pasture land, I mean, some of this ground will handle one animal unit, one cow per 10 acres of ground, or if it's better ground, they can handle more cattle. And some of this desert ground, takes a lot of acres per one cow. I said, so figure out how many cows you run on this ground. And this is a central Idaho rancher we're talking about, up in the High Valley. And I said, let's just say that you had one animal per acre of ground. How many years have you been running cattle on this ground? Oh gosh, my dad had cattle on this ground, and my grandfather had cattle on this ground. Well, since the Civil War, I said, so conservatively 150 years? And he said, yeah. And I said, so 150 years, have you ever missed any years? And he said, not really. He said, so you've had 150 years and one cow per acre, which they're using a lot more on that. They graze a lot more cattle on that. So let's just say you had one cow on that. When you take that cow for harvest, do you butcher it and put all the bones and hooves and teeth and stuff back in the soil? No. That's all taken off. It's all rendered. All of the tallow was rendered. All of the cartilage and all of that stuff is all used. The hides are all used. The beef is sent to market. I said, well, what would you tell me what an animal has in pounds of bone? And he told me out of an animal there's probably 400 to 600 pounds of bone. I said, so where do you think that bone comes from? Well, that's calcium, phosphorus, magnesium, trace minerals. And so you take that away. In a natural situation, if it were buffalo or wildebeest or reindeer up north, as they die, they recycle the bones, the animals are consumed, mineral goes back into the soil. When you think about over the thousands and even millions of years, that bone goes back into the soil. And now all of a sudden you're taking it out for 150 years. You're depleting your soil. You're actually harvesting the mineral from your soil when you harvest an animal. And if you do the multiplications of, let's just say we took 400 pounds per acre off of that ground, multiply that times 165 years or 150 years, and figure out how much calcium you're pulling off. And they all said, we take a lot more, we feed a lot more cattle on an acre of ground, irrigated grassland than that. And I said, yeah, and look at how many thousands and thousands of pounds of mineral you remove from your soil. Okay? When you remove that stuff from the soil and you don't replenish it, then you're actually taking nutrients away from your topsoil. And those nutrients are usually in the soil, and they feed the bacteria, all the microbes in the soil. The microbes digest the rock that's there, the sand, and release minerals from it, decompose the feces and the urine, and there's bacteria that are in there that are natural nitrogen-fixing bacteria. They take nitrogen out of the air, just like the legume, like an alfalfa or clover does, and they naturally build the soil. But you can't build the soil to build a good animal if you don't have adequate mineral. So in a nutshell, what's happening is we're harvesting this ground. You know, it's really not any different than if you were growing grain. If you grew grain on the field every year and you harvested that and took the straw off and baled it and took the grain off, you're harvesting all the mineral from the soil. You've got to replenish that mineral. There's a lot of natural mineral in the soil, but it doesn't degrade and doesn't decompose if you don't have adequate microbial activity. So that's what our products do. They stimulate the microbial populations, gets the soil working again, starts accumulating carbon back into the soil, which becomes depleted also, which allows the soil to then function. When the soil starts to function naturally, you start getting the health of your livestock back. What if you have a little bit of selenium in the soil, but it's tied up in the rock, and your livestock is selenium deficient? If those microbes release that selenium from the soil, it doesn't take very much. Selenium into the animal cures a lot of things like nutritional muscular dystrophy or white muscle disease. It's a contributing factor to almost every disease. We know that in humans and in mammals particularly, that almost all degenerative diseases are due to a lack of or an imbalance of minerals. Minerals, trace minerals, and microtrace minerals. They're all critical. We know we have over 72 of those in the soil. We only know that 14 of them do anything in the body. But we suspect that they all have a function in the body. So when we put on our product and it's got 72 minerals in it, we know we're getting those things back into the soil. We're getting the soil functioning again. And this isn't a urea nitrogen or ammonium sulfate or anhydrous ammonia where we're used to putting it on the ground and 10 days later having 2 inches of growth in our soil. That's not what we do. We're not forcing the plant to grow, which just makes the plant full of more water. It does not contain as many minerals. It's not a nutrition for the animals. Our animals don't do well. So when we grow grass naturally by getting the functioning of the soil properly and we replenish these minerals, our health of our animals comes back. The reproduction of our cows and our ewes and we get the fertility back in the female. We get good conception, settling in our animals. We get good delivery. We don't have retained placentas, we don't have prolapsing. It's really a magical thing that happens when we have a healthy soil. Ours isn't the only thing that does that. I mean, there's a lot of ways to do this, but just doing a regenerative farm, cycling cattle and our crops on that ground, we can build the soil back up naturally. It's just that most people don't want to take the time and they don't want to go through the effort. What we've done with our products is given them the opportunity to convert from the overuse of chemicals or the use of nothing at all back to something that causes the soil to start functioning. It's a pretty simple thing. When I look at my education and I look at my 50-some years of experience in soils and fertilization of soil and animal husbandry, I put everything that I know into these products to get that ultimate satisfaction of a healthy soil. And it's like one quote we have from a very large rancher in our desert ground. He was perfectly satisfied putting on whatever the commercial fertilizer company wanted. They came out and took the soils and they say, oh, you need this much NPK and maybe you need some sulfur. And they go out with their rigs then and spray it on the ground according to the soil tests. And they're pretty satisfied. You know, you get 18 inches of growth like that. I tried to convince him to try to use our products for 5 years probably. Finally said, all right, I'll try a tote. So he went down and he selected a few areas down in the corner of his field that he could watch. And he said, you know, I think I can see something there. So I think I'll try a tanker load. So he got a tanker and put it on X number of acres. And I told him, I said, I think for this ground, you probably ought to put 30 gallons on. I think he put on 20 or something like that. He didn't want to put on the full amount, but he still came back and said, you know, I think I got enough increase in grass, increase of hay, and increased pasturing that it was worth doing. So the next year, he decided, well, I'm going to try 30 gallons, do more acreage. And now he consistently buys 6 tankers a year. And we even found out that a couple of years ago that they were taking their 4-wheelers and spraying it on BLM ground they don't even own, but they have grazing rights. And I said, why would you put that on BLM ground? He said, we actually are getting enough more grass in the spring up there to justify putting that on BLM ground. And then, so after about 3 years in the fall, he called me up. This is a big-time lawyer. I mean, the size of his ultimate ranch is 10 miles by 35 miles long. But the 600 acres of irrigated ground that he's working with our products on, he actually called me up personally and he said, Jim, I want to tell you something. He said, you've got a really, really good product. And he said, I want to thank you for turning my desert ranch into an oasis. My jaw dropped. I thought, holy cow, that's huge coming from this man. He had to watch it close, and he really didn't want another foo-foo powder. You guys are selling all these magic juices and stuff like that, and I've tried a lot of them. None of them work, but yours works. And yours is helping my cattle. My cattle are in better shape. I'm getting better production. They're settling better. That's what we're trying to do. And it all comes from good, healthy soil. And if we even got a small fraction of the ranches out there, we wouldn't be able to handle the business. But they usually, a ranch or a farm will buy a barrel and they'll try it either using a straight or making the tea. If they're concerned about the costs, which who isn't, a lot of them will take our basic chicken soup for the soil product. They will dilute it times 10, and inoculate it with their soil. We have directions on how to do that because we got to get their natural soil bacteria in there. They grow that in those totes or in their barrel or in their tank, whatever they've got. Then they can take that, so a 270-gallon tote diluted times 10 is 2,700 gallons. They can dilute that again 10 times to 27,000 gallons, and they can put as little as 10 gallons per acre on. They can treat a big ranch if they're willing to do that, and they're going to get benefits from that. We see benefits at that level, believe it or not. But there's a lot of work. So they have to take this stuff, and they have to find containers to dilute it, and they have to work with it. But that's a very inexpensive way to do it. Now, they aren't applying a whole bunch of mineral or anything when they dilute it down that much, but they're getting the biological activity. And most of these biologic products they're selling, they're like a gallon for $70 when they can make their own stuff using this method. So really, Lars, in a nutshell, that's the story. There are a lot of questions that come up, and they're always the same thing. Well, it works on that ground, but will it work on my ground? It works on any ground, and it can't not work. It's got to work. Now, whether a person is observant enough, and honestly, when you use a product like this and you're going to change the soil at the level we're talking, it can take a year before you really get things started functioning. And honestly, it takes 3 years of consistency to get that soil where it really needs to be. And if, for example, let's say hay ground, they get 3 cuttings a year. If they'll put on an application of our product after the cutting and at regrowth, and they do that 3 times a year, most people we can't get to do, well, they'll usually do it 1 time a year. They still get good results. But if they did it 3 times a year, good results. And are the ones that really get benefits. The guys that really know how to rotate their pastures, and they're doing grazing management, and they cordon off their field into 7 different sections, and they run however many cattle they can handle on that area, whatever the acreage is. They've got a tank of water in that. They let them graze in that ground until graze down for, usually it takes about a day. So whatever those cattle need to be in there for, they're urinating, they're defecating, they're drinking their water, they're walking it in. The next morning, you open the gate, you move them down to the next pasture. You spray that ground with chicken soup for the soil, and you irrigate it. Then they go to day 2, and then they go to day 3 and 4 down to day 7. Then they've got a runway at the end of the field. They run the cattle back down to the first one that they put the chicken soup on and irrigated in 1 week ago. The grass is now gorgeous. It's not all selectively grazed. They've eaten it clear down, not clear to the ground. We don't want to leave them on there that long. We leave a little bit on there for it to grow back, and they just do that again. They can raise more cattle on the ground than any other imaginable way. I watch my neighbors sometimes. They've got about 20 acres of ground. They open the gates, they put 14 head of cattle out there. They eat here and they move over there and they eat here and they clean it up. And then pretty soon you've just got an uneven field. They should split that field down, even if they just split it into 3 places and leave them in one area for a few days and then move them to the next. They get much better production. They can run a lot more cattle, healthier cattle, but they spray the chicken soup on that after they harvest it at the end of each week, and they don't have to put it on very heavily either. They can put a few gallons on and water it in, and it's amazing what will happen. So for some people that hear this and are willing to give it a try, Others are doing it. Others are doing good management, good rotational management. They know how to do it. Others, they can't do it because their ground is too rangy, they're too big of an area. They can still apply product out on their irrigated ground or their grounds where they're grazing most. And you can't expect some of these ranchers that have thousands of acres of ground are going to spray stuff on all those acreages. But when they see what it does, they're going to start increasing the amount of acres they put it on. They realize we can grow more cattle, things are just better, and all of a sudden this soil is acting like it was when Grandpa had it. When it was virgin ground and it was homesteaded by Grandpa or great-grandpa, and everything was great, and the grass was as high as a horse's back. It's amazing. And we're seeing that all across the board. Oh, my old friend Bernie McFadden, this is when I first started experimenting with this, and we put it on his alfalfa hay. And he was very happy with how the hay turned out and so on. And by the way, he was an organic farmer. He was satisfied with his hay, but didn't make any comments one way or the other about how thick it was or how many bales or anything like that. And I was too busy to keep track of it, but he was content with it. Well, along about the next February, March, when he started lambing, he called me up. And he said, Jim, do you think that stuff we put on my hay would have anything to do with my... And I thought, well, that's what we put it on the hay for, Bernie, to improve the sheep. But I guess he was thinking more in the line of yields or something like that, not thinking about, because after they cut their last cutting of hay, they put their sheep on there, and then they feed them the hay through the winter. Then they lamb usually in late winter or early spring. And I said, well, so why do you ask, Bernie? And he said, well, I've got a lot of twins and triplets, and I don't have any bummers. I said, really? Because, if you have a ewe that has twins, usually she'll have one bigger, stronger one, and then she'll have one that we call a bummer. That's the one where you go to the house and ring on the door, and the wife comes and you can see the head of a little lamb. She's just take care of them just like they're a little baby. Give them the bottle, and that's how they treat their bummers. He said, I don't have any bummers. I said, well, Bernie, if you're getting more nutrition in your hay, your ewes are going to develop better lambs, and they're going to have more milk and going to have healthier lambs. I said, that's startling to me that you can say that you have that many twins and triplets and no bummers, but if that's the case, then, and he said, well, that's how it is. He said, it's really an amazing year. So that's what this is all about. It's raising the quality of the animals. It's raising their production. If we have a lot of open cows, then we're missing a season on that heifer or that cow because they didn't conceive. Or we lose them for one reason or another, or we have a cow that prolapses and we've got all that issue that goes along with it. We've got retained placentas that we have to worry about trying to help with and clean them up. We have to pull calves because they're not getting good delivery. All of those types of things that go away. The vet bills go way down. You've got healthier cattle. You've got less pink eye. You've got less issues with the health. They're better and just all around. That's what we're trying to achieve, and that's what we are achieving if we can get people to cooperate and do as we're asking them to do. So we see that all the time with all kinds of animals. Even if we're not working with the soil and we're dealing with supplementing our livestock with the proper chelated minerals and that type of thing, rather than just salt blocks that have minerals in them or other things that provide very little mineral in the long run. I've been in the feed business all my life. I'm third generation in business. So we fed a lot of livestock over the years, and we know that the best livestock are fed from the soil. And if we're dealing with a grazer, or in the case of a horse, a browser, and they still got good grass, we have much healthier animals than if we feed them good grain feeds and supplement them down the road. And it's much less expensive if the person's got the land. So you need the land, you need adequate sunshine, you need adequate air above and below the soil. You've got to have adequate water, but not too much. And finally, you need nutrition. And that's what we're providing to the soil in that case. So if the farm has adequate moisture, and even if they don't, when you apply our product and we start increasing the humus content of the soil, we increase the water holding capacity of the soil. So even in a drought year, we're going to get better production using this method because we're increasing the water retaining, absorbing and retaining potential of the soil. It's huge. And you know, I sound like I'm just going around and around in circles, but there's not really any more to say about it than that. Now, details, oh yeah, we can talk about what the relation to iron and copper is, and we can talk about all those things, and sometimes eventually those things need to be addressed. But for the most part, if they'll just do the basic program and get started with it, they're going to start seeing some increased health in their farm or their ranch.
Thank you.